John Milton. John Milton was born on 9th of December 1608 at Spread Eagle on the east side of Bread Street in Cheapside. Milton's father owned a shop and conducted his business as a scrivener, a professional which by the 17th century had extended beyond the work of a scribe to include the functions of notarizing, money lending, and investment brokerage. To begin with, Milton's early education was in the hands of private tutors under 1615, when he joined a school of St. Paul, which was adjoined the cathedral. In 1621, one of the great metaphysical poets, John Donne, was appointed as Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, and Milton probably heard Donne's preach on several occasions. Right from his childhood, Milton was encouraged to read an extensive subject until late in life. This could probably have been one of the reasons for Milton's total blindness in 1652. Milton thanked his father and patron for the encouragement of learning 5 languages: Latin, Greek, Hebrew, French, Italian, apart from English. 1625, Milton moved to Christ College, Cambridge. His stay in Cambridge was not altogether a happy one. With Milton's Christ College, Cambridge. Remember Christ College, Cambridge, because this is associated with a very significant event. Was Milton developing difference first with one of his tutors and later with the university way of awarding degree, which made it mandatory for candidates to sign a written declaration subscribing to the doctrine of the Church of England and acknowledge the supremacy of the king. For unknown reasons, Milton had developed differences with his tutor, William Chappell. Remember, again, factual information. Christ College, Cambridge, 1625. He developed differences with his tutor, William Chappell, and was even sent down with the university. Later, he was readmitted and assigned a new tutor. On 3rd July 1632, Milton was awarded his MA degree, and for Milton, next 6 years were devoted to private study, primarily Greek and Latin authors. One of the most decisive influence in his life and his choice of vacation as a poet was continental tour, which Milton took in 1638. Remember this fact again, continental tour in 1638. 1625, he moved to Christ College, Cambridge, and 1632 again, his new tutor was appointed. Before that, he had a differences with William Chappell, who was his earlier tutor. He had composed many of his poems in English language, but the warmth with which they were received in Italy and other part of the European continent, his resolution of becoming not only a poet but as a national poet became very strong. The year followed his returning to England in 1639 are crucial as far as pamphlets were writing in concern. 1641 to 42, Milton wrote 5 important anti-prelatical tracts of Reformation in England, of prelatical episcopacy, and he made version upon the remonstrant defense, the reason of church government, and apology for Semitimus, however, of education, and a tract on the freedom of the press, Aeropagitica, both published in 1644, are in his most important pamphlets. Milton's tumultuous life as a public figure during 1640 and 1650, it's almost 10 years, distracted his activities as a poet, and series of personal crises disturbed his domestic peace. His contemporaries John Donne and George Herbert never lost faith in Anglican Church and never doubted that a true Christian the Church existed in spite of her significant division and blemishes. However, Milton viewed the institutional church as having been corrupt. In 1638 onwards, Milton did not view the Anglican Church as any better than Roman Catholic Church. See, there is one significant aspect because his father turned Protestant from the beginning, even before his birth. So that impact is always there, and that's why he's so questioning, reasoning, and he's trying to put everything on the basis of scientific temperament. For a man as interested as Milton was in church, in personal religion, and in marriage, he invokes the biblical marriage trope seldom. He does not attempt to separate the case of human marriage and divorce from its ideal exemplar, the divining marriage of Christ and his church. As he grew increasingly disillusioned with the progress of Reformation in England, he saw himself coming into the center of an activist political religion. After 1660, Milton retired to private life and concentrated on composition of the epic Paradise Lost. After publishing A Paradise Regained in Samson Agonis 1671, Milton died early in 1674 on the 12th November and was buried in St. Giles, Cripplegate. And now we are going to discover him as an epic writer, and specifically Paradise Lost. An epic is usually described as a long narrative poem which is exalted in style and heroic in theme and content. See, this you can also remember because you can have a small questions on this. What is epic? And how, by giving the example of Paradise Lost and Virgil's Aeneid, and there are other significant epics are there, but there are certain characteristics of epic which we need to understand. So what is that? An epic is usually described as a long narrative poem which is exalted in style and heroic in theme and content. So epic is always long. It's a narration of anything, event, and it is always grand in style. Heroic is the theme and content. It's like adventure is always the theme and content. Epic are classified into two categories: primary epics and secondary epic. Earlier, for the primary epics such as Iliad and Odyssey of Homer are written version of the oral legend of tribes or nations. Tasso's Jerusalem delivered, Virgil's Aeneid, and Milton's Paradise Lost. These are epic poems. Iliad and Odyssey of Homer. Homer has written Iliad and Odyssey, and it's always Iliad and Odyssey is addressing the version of the oral legend of a tribe or a nation. Tasso's Jerusalem Delivered, Virgil's Aeneid, and Milton's Paradise Lost. Secondary epics are like primary epics are ancient in their origin and characters, since they were recited or sung orally by bards, and relied on memory and improvisation to produce an invocative effect on their audience. See, primary epic is primarily based on the oral tradition, and they are improvisation. Improvisation means it's based on the memory and how the facts and the story is being narrated. So primary epics have a spontaneous and a free grand style. The poet of the literary or secondary epics, on the other hand, create the effect of a grandeur by conscious elevation of the poetic style. Paradise Lost, which deals with the lofty subject of justifying the ways of God to man, is well known for Milton's use of grand style. Published in 1667, Paradise Lost represented for Milton and fulfillment of his two aspirations. For several decades, he had wanted to write an epic and had at the same time wanted to recreate the story for fall of man. To begin with these, there were two separate projects. Milton choosing the tale and adventure of the King Arthur to be the subject of his epic. The story of fall of man to be treated differently as a tragedy. However, this enchantment about the historic city of Arthur gradually led to abandonment of the plan to write the Arthurite. Finally, for Milton, the two projects merged into writing an epic which deals with the tragedy of fall of man. Milton decided to explore his theme in form of an epic, and this gave him a license to range over vast tracts of human experiences. Geographically, the poem ranges over the entire world, and Milton delights in cataloging the names of various places set in his journey around the earth in Book 9. This picks the name of places presumed to be corners of the earth. Milton supposedly used contemporary atlas and Bible and biblical commentaries, several works of classic antiquity for the places, names, and other references. So, Milton, generally this fall of a man is considered to be a tragedy, but he wanted to bring it as a more adventurous in a very challenging style. So, tragedy create a kind of a painful and a depressing attitude or a feeling in you, but after reading Paradise Lost, you feel more energized and encouraged. So that is why, from that passive or a negative emotion to the highly elevated emotion is trying to project as a fall of man. Milton's choice of writing an epic was reflection of the Renaissance notions of hierarchies of being. Poetic genre were ranged in an ascending order starting at lowest rung from simple lyrics up to the highest. The heroic poem or epic for Dryden, a heroic poem truly is undoubtedly the greatest work which souls of man is capable to perform. Spenser's Fairy Queen, while inspirational for Milton, was more of a romantic than an epic. For the 17th century, Virgil was a writer whose Aeneid provided a model of evolution. The classic epic would present a heroic tale of adventure, usually a long journey, accompanied by fighting and heroic victorious. In order to revise classic epic upon Christian lines, Milton needed calling Paradise Lost an epic. For Milton's heroism did not center in military warfare, the theme of the classical epic, but to be found in the spiritual warfare of the active Christian. While Satan's expedition against mankind might look like a heroic mission at a surface level, deeper analysis shows that it is self or glorifying and inferior to which glorified God. Military valor is devalued in comparison to suffering of truth, and Milton reaffirms and revises the epic tradition. Some critics argue that value military and glorious Milton substitute the domestic and pastoral ones. For the theme of human greater divine greatness with emptiness and Adam and Eve, Milton makes Paradise Lost the first domestic as an epic in the traditional sense of the word, because Milton does not follow the compensation and norms of classic epic. However, Milton does follow some of the conventions of the traditional epic. For instance, the supernatural intervention is a part of the epic tradition where gods and goddesses intervene in human action, either a validating theme and disapproving of them. The invocation of the muses is another such inventions which Milton follows. He evokes Urania to inspire, illuminate him so that he can write good poetry. Beginning the story of Medea in the middle is also an epic convention, and Milton follows closely. After the statement of his theme and invocation to the muses in Book 1, Milton begins the narration in the middle and action. Chronologically, the story begins in Book 5. Milton's use of epic similes, which form an integral part of his grand style and another epic conventions that he follows. Milton invests his poem with complexity, richness of meaning. Though his use of epic similes to illustrate the Book 9 takes the instance of the temptation scenes when the poet describes the temper as is about to address Eve, as when of old some orator renowned, so standing, moving, or to heighten, upgrown. Though such a simile, Milton conveys a sense of the deceit and cunning of the Satan's rhetorical power and theatrical performance that tempered puts up to begin evil. The religious and political background of the 17th century. This is very important to understand. What is the religious and political background of the 17th century? The literature of any age is influenced by the social, religious, and political factors of the period. Milton's view and his writing demonstrate the deep impact of the events in his age. Of David Dyches puts the great debate on religion and politics, which divides the English nation in the middle of the 17th century, helped to determine the course of Milton's career and shape of his literary ambition. Religious controversies in 17th century is quite inseparable from political controversy. The Elizabethan government had used the pulpit of political propaganda. Stuart government also did the same, and the counter force were opposed by the Puritans who strove to establish an alternative politics as well as alternative religion. Puritans were always against the established order. The uncertainty in the post-Elizabethan era was aggravated by the fact that Queen Elizabeth left no natural successor of hers. James VI of Scotland, Lord Essex, Lady Arabella Stuart, and many others put their claim to the throne after Queen Elizabeth's death in 1623. With James' accession to power, there were several attempts to depose him. The Puritans had never liked the coming to the power of monarch who was a favorable comparison between the Catholic and the Protestant idea. For the Puritans, their time was ripe in 1642 and Charles I ruled. Under Oliver Cromwell and a civil war was led to the meaningful conclusion of them, and Charles I was beheaded in 1649. Remember, this fact is very significant. Charles I was beheaded in 1649. Charles I was beheaded in 1649. The Puritans ruled England for 1642 to 1660, and in these years there was emphasis on thrift, economy, moral explanation, purity, and the self and home. Quite early, the Britain had cast his case with the Puritans' revolution. Was active political writing pamphlets which supported the execution of Charles I. One of the consequences of Puritan rule was their antipathy towards all form of fun and entertainment. As a result, all theatres in England were closed in 1642. This is again a significant fact. All theatres in England were closed in 1642. Literary activities, book and book seats for almost 20 years. The Puritan stream is obvious in Milton's advocacy for righteousness and moral purpose in his writing. To understand Paradise Lost in relation to Milton's age and career, we have to bear in mind that Milton spent almost 20 years from 1641 to 1660 writing prose work. The year following Civil War, Britain began to increasingly question the validity of the institutions and centralized form of secular power and external authority. He came to rely more on authority in the Bible. Those written record puts in Paradise Lost. The year 1660, which ended the Puritans' rule in England, got Charles II to the throne. The subsequent years are referred as the Restoration period, which obviously refers to the restoration of the monarchy and theatre in England. The Restoration was period when theatre opened with a new and added vigor after 18 years. Renaissance hierarchy and cosmology. Milton follows some of the dominant conventions and beliefs of his age, such as the belief in the hierarchical order of all things in the universe. All begins were arranged in hierarchy and beginning of the god at the top to the meanest of the image. Every peak of the creation was a link in the chain of thus enhance the dignity of all creation. To begin with, there is inmate class, which includes elements, liquid and metals. In next hierarchy was the vegetation class, which also has both existence as well as life. Next comes the sensitive class, which is feeling as well, and all animals are part of this. What distinguishes man from beast animal is that faculty of reason which man possesses. Higher up, angel, and finally God complete the hierarchy. To an ordinary Elizabethan, this hierarchy was a part of divine order which was meant to keep everything in place. So if the Elizabethan believes in the ideal order and were also afraid last and for to be upset, this order then meant cosmic anarchy. So when Satan tries to disrupt this natural hierarchical scheme of things, he is thrown out of the heaven. Milton was exposed to the competing cosmologies of the time. Ptolemaic with concern of the geocentric view of the universe, and Copernicus with the heliocentric view of the universe. Milton primarily follows the Ptolemaic system of the universe with the earth and center, and there is an external evidence to suggest Milton was familiar with the Copernicus theory as well. Milton's universe starts with the Ephraim heaven an abode of God and angel. Heaven is separated from the new world by the golden chain. This golden chain by the new world hangs on to the heaven and serves the opening of the passage of the angel from heaven to earth. The center of this new world is earth, around which revolves sun and moon and seven planets fixed. Then there are further chaos and finally hell at the end, consisting of shapeless matters and new receives to be made four elements: earth, air, fire and water. Milton's hell is a burning pool of fire where sinners are tortured and punished. The presence of two competing theories of the universe is suggested for the public nature. So this is how this is the changing temperament in the geography and politics, where Copernicus is talking as the Earth. The Earth is one of the planet and Sun as in the center. And before that, Ptolemy is saying that Sun is Earth is in the center. So the cosmic order which is there, according to the Christian tradition, is God and angels are on the top. Then comes to the the inmates class, which include a liquid and matter. Next to it is vegetation class, which is life. Next to it comes with the feeling, as well as animals are part of this. Then the distinguished class is a human being, and upper to human being is angels and then God. So this hierarchy goes on. On the top, God, then angels, then human beings, then animals, then vegetation, and then the inmate class. So this is how the hierarchy goes. So this is the end of page number 6, and it started with a beginning of this open school. Milton follows some of the dominant convention and beliefs of his age, such as the belief in hierarchical order of all things in the universe. All beings were arranged in hierarchy, beginning from God at the top to the meanest of the inmates class. Every speak of creation, every piece of creation was linked in the chain of being, thus it enhanced the dignity of all creation. To begin with, there is the inmate class, which includes the elements, liquid and metals. Next in hierarchy was the vegetation class, which had both existence as well as life. Next came the sensitive class, which had feeling as well. All animals were a part of this. Was distinguish man from beast. Animal is the faculty of reason which man possesses. Higher up angel, and finally God complete the hierarchy. To an ordinary Elizabethan, this hierarchy was a part of divine order which was meant to keep everything in place. So if the Elizabethan believes in an ideal order, they were also afraid lest it should be upset. Disorder to them meant cosmic anarchy. So when Satan tries to disrupt this natural hierarchical scheme of things, he is thrown out of the heaven. Milton was exposed to the competing cosmologies of the time. Ptolemy's with its conception of geocentric view of the universe, and Copernicus with its heliocentric view of the universe. Milton primarily follows the Ptolemy system of universe with the earth as the center, though there is ample external evidence to suggest that Milton was familiar with Copernicus' theories as well. Milton's universe started with the Empyrean heaven and abode of the God and his angels. Heaven is a separate for the new world by golden chain. The golden chain by which the new world hangs on to the heaven also served as an opening of the passage of angels from heaven to earth. The center of this new world is the earth, around which revolve the sun, the moon, the seven planets, fixed stars, the crystalline sphere, and finally the premium mobile. Then there was further chaos and finally hell at the center. Chaos consisted of shapeless matters, where the new world was conceived to made up of the four elements: earth, air, fire and water. Milton's hell is a burning pool of fire where sinners are fortuned and punished. The presence of the two competing theories of the universe is suggestive of the public nature of poem. He did not use the poem to propagate his own view, rather he allowed it to voice the range of opinions prevalent in England at the time. Paradise Lost and Introduction. Paradise Lost, divided into 12 books, tells us the story of Satan and his followers who have been expelled from heaven on the charge of rebellion against God. Satan finally resolved to take the revenge upon God by harming God's creation, Adam and Eve. The rest of the poem depicts Satan's craft and deceit as he manages to tempt Eve into eating the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge. Thus, the story of fall of man is given to the readers through these 12 books. The Bible and the Bible commentaries account for a substantial part of the poem. Book 9th concentrates on a redemption of Eve by Satan. Now, you remember these lines because when there are certain points which are so significant and you need to remember also. So, book 9 concentrates on temptation of Eve by Satan. You remember, book 9 concentrates on temptation of Eve by Satan. So, in book 9, Satan is providing temptation to Eve. So I think there are a lot of dialogues between Satan and Eve, and the temptation, the process of temptation by Satan to Eve. The book begins with the conversation between Adam and Eve, where Eve suggested separation from Adam to create to the larger amount gardening world. Adam who has been forewarned for the coming danger is unwilling to let Eve go alone. His argument is that the enemy would confront by two people instead of one, would find himself weak. Eve sees the argument and Adam's distrust of Eve and insists on moving alone in Eden. The parting takes place and Satan gets his opportunity when he sees Eve alone, taking care of the plants. Satan enters Eden and takes shape of serpent and proceeds towards Eve. He tempts Eve through flattery and is able to convince her that eating the fruit will make life her move up hierarchy. The way he has moved up from being beast to possessing the power of speech and reason. So this serpent who is coming and interacting with Eve is this serpent, because generally serpents, they don't speak and they don't have power of reasoning. But this serpent is different, who can speak and who can have reasoning. So that's why Satan is trying to convince Eve that if you eat the fruit of knowledge, then it will give you more reasoning and more high elevated status, elevated sense of knowledge. And that's how he gave the example of himself, that being a serpent, I am able to speak and put things in reason. Eve is convinced and she plucks and eats the apple. Immediately she becomes aware of the change in herself. She appears before Adam, ready to lie to him. Adam listens to the story and is aware that Eve will now be permanently separate from him. Unable to bear this separation, Adam knowingly plucks the fruit and eats it. And unknown elements of lust now enters into the relationship in sharp contrast to the innocence and purity of their earliest married life. As a Christian poem in classic epic form, Paradise Lost reflects the humanist fusion of Christian with classical learning, its assertion of man's free will with God's omnipotence is a classic resolvable concern throughout. The invocation. The invocation is a device used by all epic poets. The purpose of invocation is the introduction of the theme and seeking inspiration from the muses. The muse is invoked for the reason of providing Milton with ideas and expressions which have not been attempted till now. In the light of the narrator's rejection of classical abuse of the spirit, we can judge how far an epic been transformed. Narrators provide unity to epic by this invocation, openly opening books 1, 3, 4 and 9. Although claiming the status, because in your syllabus the book number 1, 2, 4 and 9, 10 is there, and my concern would be that I am focusing on these particular poems only, particular books only. Although claiming the status of if literary authorship, the text must display the tenaciousness of its spiritual authority. According at the narrator's first appearance, the prayer of the divine inspiration for the authority to speak truth involved an equally emphatic reference to blindness, both physical and spiritual. What in me is dark, illumine. A constant reference to the reader's maintain the reader's sense of the next text construction, its objective and its problems as well. The juxtaposition of the narrator's self is here. The epic form is a reading clue to this course in confronting the tragedy of fall, striving to describe adequately something by which he himself is compromised as a storyteller. Milton's theme is man's disobedience of God's command and consequence of this fall. Reference to one great man, the shepherd, are the Christ where the narrators look up for redemption. He embarked on a feat of spiritual danger, presuming to portray God and His truth despite all the human facilities in this post-lapsarian world. Without His guide, the Holy Spirit, his flight will fail. In this alienation from the God's side, also in a board of the daring undertaking, the narrator's one counterpart with the narrative quite strongly is Satan himself. Against this sinister parallel, this embodiment of the false speaking and fake authorities to which the narrator himself may succumb, the invocations repeatedly announce the matter's lack of self-sufficiency and need for God's authorization by way of inspiration. Book number 1. Now we are focusing on book number 1. Book number 1 opens with a statement of the theme and subject of the whole poem, the disobedience of man, his fall and consequent loss of paradise. Milton goes on to refer the redemption of mankind by Christ. Till one great man, for the ambitious task of justifying the ways of God to men, Milton seeks divine inspiration and help from heavenly muse. The poet believes that his subject is more exalted and heroic than any other epic, as writing of the things attempted yet in prose or rhythm. In the following notes, brief explanations of a reference in the text and meaning of different difficult word phrases are provided. These are lines. Man's first act of transgression was eating the apple of the forbidden tree of knowledge. Then, there are some phrases and references came, so let's understand. In line number 1 of book 1, Paradise Lost. Man's first act of transgression was eating the apple of the forbidden tree of knowledge. Then 2. Mortal. The words combine sense of human and fatal or death producing. Eden, the garden or a beautiful place in the newly created earth where Adam and Eve lived in a state of bliss before the fall. One greater man, Christ, in theological tradition, the second Adam. Christ provides man with an opportunity to regain bliss by his supreme sacrifice. The blissful seat. Paradise, when all wickedness is dissolved after the last judgment, earth and heaven shall be blissful. Heavenly muse, the Spirit of God. Milton follows the epic convention of invocation to the muse, but with the difference that his muse is no classical symbol of poetry or Sinai, the mountain top which was set apart by God for his communication with Moses. Here Moses received the law from God, the 10 commandments. Shepherd. Moses, who was a shepherd, God first spoke to him When he washed sheep on Mount Herb, he gave him the law when he became the shepherd of the people. Chosen seed, the chose race of Israel. In the beginning, rose out of chaos. Moses, supposed author of Genesis, tells us, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without a form and void. The Spirit of God moved upon the face of water. Zion, the hill of Jerusalem. Siloah, the book and pool near the temple of Jerusalem. Aeonian Mount Helicon in Boeotia, considered sacred to the Muses. Milton's intention is to make his poem, which is inspired by God, excel the great classical poem which were inspired by Muses. The Spirit of God. Milton now appeals directly to the Spirit of God and seeks divine help and instruction. Before all attempts, the pure heart is preferred before all attempts. Compare Sam Testament and Corinthians, the New Testament. Dove-like, pregnant, the Spirit of God brooded and brought out of universe out of the unshaped matter of chaos, thus putting life into chaos. High argument. Milton wishes to measure up to the demand of his great subject, vindicate, justify, show the justice of. Now we are in book 9, and these are the explanations we are trying to get in the beginning from line number 1 to 30. Milton says that he is not going to talk anymore of God or angels. Now this is a separate video related to book 9, and we are trying to understand what is there in book 9. These are very accurate points. Please listen them carefully, note it down and listen it again. Milton says that he is not going to talk any more of God or angels sitting comfortable with man. He writes that those times have come to an end when man used to share with angels in his pastoral repast. The tone must change to a tragic one because of betrayal of the trust, defiance and disobedience on the part of man against God. The loss of harmony is the loss of mutuality of community and communication in which men's conversation with God was possible. The notion of his companionship to change his tone, and Milton on his part justified God's anger, the alienation from man, which is quite consonance with the purpose of his writing this poem, to justify the ways of God to man. He writes that man's disobedience of eating the forbidden fruit prompts God's anger, which brought suffering and misery and eventually death. Milton believes in liberty in pursuit of knowledge, since he also believes in God's authority over man. Liberty for him was problematic. He deplores the obedience of man, but the act of Adam and Eve to choose knowledge over the total obedience is also from the birth of man's capacity for true liberty. Milton is unable to resolve this contradiction. Milton's God has also been subject of some discussion. For most critics, Milton's God is so tyrannical that Satan's rebellion has appeared just and reasonable. In these lines as well, God's anger is heightened, which brought misery and death to all mankind. A.G.A. Wadlock comments that Milton's attempt to justify God lies in ruins, for he is neither just nor merciful. A.G.A. Wadlock comments that Milton's attempt to justify God lies in ruins, for he is neither just nor merciful. Generally, we see that God is just and merciful. But here, A.G.A. Wadlock says that Milton's God is neither just nor merciful. Lines 13 to 19. This is about book 9, remember. Here, Milton justifies his theme by saying that it is not less heroic than the action taken place in Homer's Iliad and Virgil's Aeneid. In fact, Milton writes this theme in superior to those two poets' tales of the adventure and heroism. Line 14 and 16, the wrath of stern Achilles is subject announced at the beginning of the Iliad. His foe is Hector. Line 17, in the Aeneid turns is the suitor of Lavinia. He is killed by Aeneas, who married Lavinia himself. Line 18-19, in the Odyssey, Neptune's ire is directed against Odyssey, the Greek who had blind Neptune, sun, and Cyclops tall Polytheseus in the Aeneid. Juno's ire is directed against Aeneid, Cythereus, that is Venus' son, who is also described because Juno's ire was prompted by Paris' judgment in favor of Venus. Celestial patroness Urania. Next Milton again implores the muse Urania for inspiration in line 20-26. He thanks Urania for his visiting him in sleep and inspiring him with a verse ever since he had chosen to write on the subject of fall of man. Since first this subject, beginning tale, is a reference to Milton's deliberation and initial choice of King Arthur's heroic adventure as his epic story. Milton here justifies himself by writing that he is unfit by nature to write a traditional subject of epic like war and military heroism. Instead, he writes that he values the inner heroic virtue which are far superior to the power of warrior. Now, important here is that common assumptions that Milton rates military courage low compared to the spiritual warfare of the creative Christian. Line 48 onwards, the last direct contact with Saturn was at the end of Book 4, when Saturn narrows escape as a trial of strength with Gabriel. Milton here begins a story for Saturn intent on deceiving the human race, more determined now after having been derived out of the Eden by the angel Gabriel. He has meanwhile circled the earth curious, avoiding daylight because the angel Uriel also observed him entering the paradise and had forewarned the other angel of God the paradise. However, Saturn kept circulating the earth for 7 nights, keeping himself on the dark side always. The reference to the equator and too poetic of sympathetic of Milton avoid interest in contemporary geography. Line 70 to 82 describes Saturn's journey on earth. Saturn has reached earth by entering the river Tigris, which going underground from paradise and enters earth in the shape of a fountain. Saturn's stature has undergone a dramatic change from an effective creator and general relying on troops to a sly deceiving creature who is always hiding himself. Searching for men everywhere, Saturn intervenes traverses the earth from Eden to Pontus, the Black Sea, and the reference of Maiotis is the Sea of Esso. This movement of Saturn is notwithstanding, with culmination with the river or flowing into the Arctic Ocean. Next, Saturn travels westward past the Orontes River in Turkey and Syria to the Pacific Ocean and finally to India. After his roaming around the world, Saturn finally chose the serpent as the creator in whom he thought it fit to enter and hide his evil intentions here. The choice is made because while Willy's snake is so naturally cunning and subtle that whatever slight risk he might employ, no one would regard them as suspicious. Whereas if observed in other animals, they might arouse the suspicion that diabolical power and operative here range of animal behavior. Before he enters into the serpent, Saturn indulged in outbursts of lamentation, envy and malice. Thus he resolved, but first from inward grief, his bursting passion into plains thus poured. Saturn's speech, which follows this praises God's creation, namely earth and man. The picture of the universe present here is of geocentric one and earth at the center and other heavenly objects. Line 109 to 113 talk about the hierarchical conception of the universe where each speck of creation was put in a graded hierarchy from bottom to the top. Saturn says that this hierarchy starts from herbs, plants and animals and finally culminates on earth in the power of reason of man. In these, not in themselves all dire known virtue appear, productive in herbs, plants and noble birth, of creatures, animates with gradual life, of growth, sense, reason, all stump up in man. For next few lines describe the torment Saturn feel in pleasure of others around him, as we knowledge in heaven from it would have been greater. And the more I see pleasure about me, so much more feel torment with me as from the hateful seas of countries. He muses that the only way he can take his revenge upon God is by harming his creation. Saturn argues that man's position is below the angels and it is great dignity that angels have been employed to serve man on various quarters. Milton's point of emphasis is that this placing is not static. By means of rational self-deployment, the human being can perfect themselves, fulfilling God's promise that unfailing human will eventually rise to heavenly state. Milton's doctrine of human perfectibility is that the informing principle of the Eden happiness. It deplores the fact that he once used to sit with God and is now constrained to hide himself into the beast. But then Satan has justified himself if all alone in the name of ambition and revenge. O foul sin that I, who erst contended with goats to sit the highest, am now constrained in a beast and midst the bestial slim species to incarnate and endure. But what will not ambition and reason descend to? Next, Saturn enters the serpent who is asleep and prepares himself for the temptation of Eve. The sense of this serpent which are pertaining to burst are now transformed into intelligible one. The power of reason and speech are in addition to the faculties of the serpent. With the approach of morning, Adam and Eve appear in the garden. Wonder how they would manage this garden where the work was more than the people assigned to do this work. In line 205 to 225, Eve's addressing a speech to Adam telling him that they need to divide their labors because of if they stick together, their conversation interrupt the work. Adam's reply through beginning with a clear demarcation of the work assigned to man and woman in a household will move away to mutual work and sharing. Adam praised Eve for what she has proposed to, in that she has been thinking out best way of working. There is nothing fine in a woman who to set her mind on what is good for her home and will strengthen her husband in worthwhile work. But God has not imposed work as a duty to so strict that is preluded in intermittent refreshment of food. Adam argued that God did not make man to work only but to take delight in things. Delight to reason joy. Line number 243. The scene shows that Adam and Eve planning and working together to preserve, cultivate and sustain the race to high level of perfection the world that has been made for them. Adam, however, is apprehensive of division of labor as suggested by Eve. He voices his concern in line number 251 to 260. Remember, line number 251 to 260, where Adam is voicing his concern for separation of the division of the labor, that he has been forewarned of an enemy who would attempt to harm the couple. Adam's argument is that if the two of them are together, the enemy might not be successful in his attempt. Explains that it is not in distress of her that he discouraged separation. He would avoid any hostile attempt against her. Anyone who tries to tempt another, however, mainly does single mud in supposing that the person he assaults may be corruptile. Adam advised Eve not to write off too contemptuously the malicious cunning and subtlety of the foe who provide capable of seducing angels to revolt. Next, Adam ascribed two reasons for enemies' design: one, to withdraw the grace of God and them; the second, which is disturb the state of mutual love and bliss in which Adam and Eve. Adam concludes by saying that whenever and wherever there is a hint of danger, the wife sticks by her husband's side only, who guards her or with her the worst enduring. Line number 269. Milton expresses a similar view of the marriage in the judgment of Martin Brusher, 1644. He argues that husband is the head and preserver not only of his wife but also his children and family. The Christ is of his church. The whole action in the poem confirms that Adam excelled in many graces, even in the womanly. Adam is more rational, Eve more loving. Adam is prone to unconsciousness, Eve to self-love. Eve shows her displeasure at Adam's distrust of her. She tells Adam that she was present while he and Raphael talks about higher things. But Milton's insistence on Eve's intellectual capability and individual moral responsibility is less widely recognized, complicated as it is her hierarchical subordination to Adam. Adam's reply from line number 290 onward is only an assertion of earlier belief that enemy would not dare to attempt any attack when couples is together. Adam further argues that away of the enemy would surely be very subtle, since he could seduce angels against God. Even supremely confident of herself argues that it is worth taking a chance against this enemy, because by shunning his advances she would gain double honor and prove himself worthy of God. She says that faith, love and virtue are not worth much until they are tested and tried against difficulties, and in our virtue are so easily shaken by persuasion or of an enemy, then God creates us in an imperfect manner. Frail is our happiness if this be so, and Adam and Eve were no Eden, those thus exposed. Adam's reply is fitting disquisition on the irresolvable conflict between God's omnipotent and free will accordance. He argues that God has created us perfect by giving us the faculty of reason He has made.